a few words about what the seminar is planned about and what we are going to do in these 2 days. To trace the right of citizenship historically in pre-capitalist social formations, the right of citizens limited to specific social groups. Kings, feudals, lords, and the nobles, they had formed the upper class. The persons from the lower classes were excluded from the right of citizenship. After establishment of capitalism, when the regime of capitalist law came into existence, this limited scope of citizenship rights was widened and they became available. Even though all were considered equal before the law, in fact, it was only the upper classes who enjoyed the benefits of the capital law. In the British era, the capitalistic laws were imposed during the era of British rule. This is the time where, at the first time in India, there was a law that was formally equally applicable, in contrast to the prevailing inequalities which were based on the Brahminical religious laws. Even capitalistic law that treated all the subjects as equal was imposed during the era of British rule. Still, the Indians excluded from several rights of the citizenship because of their political subjugation. Towards the end of 19th century, political movement which was a movement for the political independence emerged. This was a movement struggled for political rights and a desire for the political rights among Indian people. On the other side, backward communities which were excluded all the kinds of rights by Brahminical religious law found a space to struggle for social rights on the basis of capitalistic. This has resulted in the movements against the caste and the social reforms in various parts of India. If we consider in the state of Maharashtra, in the second half of the 19th century, Mahatma Jyotiba Phule started Sadak movement. At the beginning of 20th century, Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar made his entry as a leader on the stage of Indian politics. He took on anti-caste and anti-patriarchal legacy of Satyashodak movement and widened the Dalit movement. He awakened an urge for gaining social rights among Dalits who were the lowest stratum of the society and made them conscious about their rights. He was very clear that citizenship is independent India should be inclusive of lowest strata of society. Moving to after independence, Indian Constitution granted right of citizenship to all. Welfare state assumes the notion of differences as determined by social needs. Constitution gives every Indian certain fundamental rights. The restrictions on the caste-based occupations were lifted. Indians have to choose their own occupation and if required can migrate in order to find a job of their own choice. Indian politics centered on industrial growth, which resulted in formation of metropolitan cities. Dalits and marginalized social who had suffered oppression under caste system opted to move to the cities, but due to the lack of education and skills, they were forced to take up the available jobs rather than those they wanted to have of their own choice. They built slums in order to live in cities. These residents had to struggle for the civil rights and for their basics for the living, such as water, shelter, food, and electricity. The Indian society is based on the caste system. Caste at the top, and the Dalits, Adivasis, and nomadic tribes communities are at the bottom. With the globalization, these marginalized communities are facing with the newer types of struggles in their lives. Citizenship is a complex concept. It refers to the relationship between the citizens and the state, the context of the rights and obligations. It is based on the principle of inclusion and exclusion of members. Citizenship is expression of one's membership in a political community. It is not just a certain status. It is defined by a set of rights and responsibilities and also an identity. The feminist critique of citizenship focuses on major two issues. First, on the need to challenge the notion of community, and secondly, on the need to break the binaries of private and public which have structured the theorization of citizenship rights. Citizenship operates on binary principles of public-private, productive-reproductive, private-cultural sphere. Private and public are governed by patriarchal principles. In this seminar, It aims to discuss the complex concept of citizenship and take an account of feminist contribution to it. We will trace historical evolution and the dynamics in modern India. These 2 days, we will attempt to look upon relation between the caste, class, gender and citizenship with reference to women in general, Dalit, Adivasi, OBCs and Muslims in particular.
Thank you, Dr. Chauhan. I now take opportunity to invite the Dean of School of Development Studies, Ram Kumar, to please deliver the welcome address.
Good morning, everyone. Professor Vandana Sonalkar, Advocate Flevia Agnies, and distinguished delegates come from far and away to attend this conference. Let me begin by welcoming you all on behalf of the School of Development Studies, of which the Advanced Center for Women's Studies is a part of, to this seminar on the question of citizenship of women in India. There was the very interesting note which was shared with you by Dr. Sujata Chavan. It underlines the importance of this in India today. It's a well-known fact that the freedom movement of India, which was itself, the ideals of which was an inspiration from the European Enlightenment, freedom, equality, fraternity, so on, was a mass movement. The mass movement in which people from all castes, all genders, and all classes participated with equal elan. Why did everyone participate in the freedom movement with such great enthusiasm? Why could the freedom movement become a mass movement that it was? Primarily because people had hopes from it. These hopes were hopes of liberation, hope of a better society which would follow after independence. These were inspired by the ideals of freedom, what was happening in the Western world. They had, in fact, Ambedkar himself, who wrote the Constitution, largely inspired by John Dewey, his PhD guide. John Dewey was an Enlightenment theorist of his own in the United States. So there's this whole series of events and connections between the freedom movement and its idea inspired by the global movement for freedom across the world. Now, this tension that at the time of the freedom movement, people participated in it, but the fact that if freedom does not pass on, if power does not pass on in a democratic manner to all the of the country after independence, the meaning of the freedom would be diminished. That was also appreciated. That tension beautifully captured in B.R. Ambedkar's last address to the Constituent Assembly, where he pointed out that we have now political democracy, which is one person, one vote. But this has no meaning unless, of course this has meaning, he didn't say that, but if it does not translate into one person, one value, which is the next stage of advancement of this freedom, then our political democracy itself will be in peril. That is a very sort of far-sighted statement by Ambedkar, which 60 to 70 years later we are remembering and finding it out to be quite accurate. Now are facing this question of, though we have become one of the largest democracies of this world, have we, in terms of economic equality, in terms of the other rights that citizenship bestows on people, we achieved that kind of progress? The answer is very clearly no. Though we have made pockets of progress, some amount of progress, we have not made much progress in the other spheres. This is extremely important because citizenship itself, in some form, though it is of course governed by multiple, formed by multiple theoretical perspectives, is also an idea which came from the Enlightenment, because it was the Enlightenment which first coined the term social contract in a very different sense. If you look at scientists like T.H. Green, Bosanquet and so on, you will see very beautiful writings of how the idea of social contract emerged during the Enlightenment, but which sort of went into a hiatus for a very long period of time, and it was revived when the European welfare state was born in the 1940s. When the New Deal came to states in 1933, and when the Beveridge Report was implemented in 1942 in the United Kingdom to establish the National Health Service, of social contract was revived. So what you see in the 1960s and early 1970s in the United Kingdom is a rebirth of the idea of social contract of the welfare state, which was an effort to sort of recapture the idea of citizenship in the modern administrative parlance, where the welfare state was born, social security was sort of institutionalized, and redistributionist measures were also embedded in public policy. This was a great advance that we had in the 1960s and 70s. But the coming in of Thatcher in the United Kingdom with an explicit slogan of kill contract has been in the period of globalization, liberalization that we have seen from the 70s onwards till now, a crisis of sorts for the idea of citizenship itself. And this crisis of citizenship, which in the current era cuts across caste, class, and gender lines, and that's the context in which we are meeting here today for this very important conference, which takes one part of it and tries to look at it more intensively, question of citizenship of women in India. I do not need to underline the important idea of intersectionality of different other categories that will come in here. You need to do that. You are all more aware of it than me. And I'm sure those categories of caste and class will also actively come in to the discussion that you will have in the next 2 days. In that sense, I congratulate the Advanced Center for Women's Studies, particularly Dr. Sujata Chavan and other colleagues who have taken this initiative to organize this very important conference. I am very happy to see colleagues coming back and leading the show. Professor Sonalkar is here, and also see very interest of topics and speakers who are being lined up, and I hope you will have a very fruitful set of interactions in the next 2 days. I also must thank the sponsors of this program, ICSSR, Union Bank of India, and others who are also present here. ICSSR and the unit. I thank them for their cooperation. I welcome them. They've come to become part of us in the next 2 days. Let me also welcome each one of you who have come to attend this seminar, and I hope that you will have excellent interactions over the next 2 days. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor. It is an immense pleasure to introduce Professor Wandana Sonalkar. She's been a Cambridge student, a feminist economist by training. She has movement since her student days. She returned to India during the 70s, started working in the intersectionality of caste, class. She started the Women's Studies Center at Dr. Baba Saheb Ambedkar Marathwada University, Aurangabad, Tarabai Shinde Women's Studies Center. She has a vast collection of publications and translation to her credit. She has also been our former chairperson, Center for Women's Studies, CISS. I now invite Professor Wandana Sonalkar to please deliver the keynote address.
Thank you. Thank you, Shashi. Thank you, Sujata. Professor Ramkumar. I'm happy to share this dais with an old friend, Flavius. And I see many familiar faces before me, of course. It is good to be back at a seminar organized by the Advanced Center for Women's Studies. The theme of this seminar is the question of citizenship of women in India. Feminist scholarship globally has contributed significantly to the discourse on citizenship. The modern idea of citizenship evolved from the application of man-made rather than divinely prescribed, applying to those who left feudal estates to live in the emerging towns of Europe. The French Revolution gave us the liberal ideas of liberty, equality, fraternity, and of equality of all citizens before the law. Of course, Marx pointed out that this liberal conception of equal citizenship was limited in a divided society where the bourgeoisie held power by virtue of owning the means of production. So we have, as Professor Ramkumar pointed out, the attainment of a modern idea of democracy in which citizens were equal before the law. This was the culmination of a struggle, a mass movement. And yet, since the society is divided on the basis of class, and since it was a capitalist democracy, the equality that citizens enjoyed was, in essence, limited because the apparently equal contract between workers and capitalists was actually equal. And there were many such apparent parities which disguised inequalities of different kinds. Moreover, the status of citizenship was operative only in the public sphere. The first feminist critiques questioned this division between public and private and argued that the liberal conception of citizenship privileged men who dominated the public and decreed that women's place was in the home. Thus, through feminist efforts, it became possible to apply the idea of a rights-based citizenship within the home in the domestic sphere. We have the slogan, "The personal is political." We have the notion of rights entering the domestic sphere for the first time as a result of the efforts of feminists. In the Indian context, feminist groups succeeded in 2005 in getting a law passed on domestic violence. Indira Jaisingh has documented the story of the struggle for this law, the kind of arguments that had to be made, the kind of challenges to the conception of the domestic sphere, the division between private and public in a very concrete sense. And this law was passed, but of course the fight for its implementation is a continuing one. As time went on, this argument that the liberal conception of citizenship was exclusionary with respect to women was extended to several other groups other than women. As Iris Young puts it, the ideal that the activities of citizenship express or create a general will transcends the particular differences of group affiliation, situation, and interest, has in practice excluded groups judged not capable of adopting that general point of view. Young continues, differences in capacities, culture, values, and behavioral styles exist among groups, but some of these groups alleged strict adherence to a principle of equal treatment tends to perpetuate oppression or disadvantage. And I think the approach of intersectionality, which we mentioned, which was mentioned earlier by Professor Ramkumar, and which is being taken up by feminists today and also in other struggles, now respects the fact that the principle of universal citizenship, of equality of all before the law, must also take into account differences between citizens. Applying this criticism in practice has in recent years brought recognition of the citizenship rights of many groups, for example, the LGBT community, the physically and mentally challenged, migrants, both within nationals and across them, as well as the victims of trafficking and their descendants. Feminist scholarship and activism have been crucial in bringing about these gains in perception. Early second wave feminists spoke of women's rights over their bodies, and this developed into a wider assertion of sexuality and a broader conception of gender. Feminist awareness of women considered as weak and therefore incapable of certain activities and in need of protection has made us more sensitive to the rights of the disabled, bringing a more inclusive vision of humanity and of the society we want to build. The very conception of citizenship is intimately tied to the modern nation state. The history of many modern nations, even when they have emerged from a fight against imperialist colonization, have been tainted by violence and by contested borders. Feminists have drawn attention to the violence suffered by women in conflict areas and also revisited the history of nation formation. Today, women cross borders both as voluntary migrants in search of jobs and a better life and as victims of trafficking. Feminist scholarship has brought a more nuanced understanding of the problems faced by women and men and children in such situations and called for changes in immigration laws and rules of emigration. These are some of the examples of the achievements, the concrete achievements that have followed from intervention in the debate on citizenship. There have recently been some studies of the situation of the nomadic tribes whose citizenship status is often questioned because of their shifting places of residence. On the other hand, these communities practice very harsh patriarchal controls over their own women with violent forms of punishment for transits. Thus, the feminist contribution to the discourse on citizenship has been both theoretically and practically productive. Another important contribution to the critique of the liberal conception of citizenship comes from the movement against caste. Ambedkar was aware that the principle of equal citizenship enshrined in the Indian Constitution applied to political and economic rights, but did not do enough to protect against discrimination on social grounds, which has religious sanction and is deeply ingrained in the culture of society structured on the hierarchical principle of caste. Laws against the practice of untitled and the provision of reservations for Dalits and Adivasis in jobs and in education went some way addressing this lacuna. Later on, the Scheduled Castes and Tribes Prevention of Atrocity 1989 criminalized various forms of violence which emerged against persons from these marginalized communities, especially as they began to assert their rights in post-independence India. However, these laws are continually being contested by privileged groups that see them as an encroachment of their rights. This contestation has become louder and more vociferous after 1990. Demonstrations against the recommendations of the Mandal Commission and the more recent Maratha Morcha's repeal of the so-called Atrocities Act are two examples. So the concept of citizenship is continually being contested, and this is one major aspect of political struggles which I think have become even more intense in recent times. I've pointed out elsewhere that Ambedkar's efforts to introduce the Hindu Code Bill amendment aimed to extend the egalitarian principles of the Constitution into the sphere of personal law. His arguments can be read as a questioning of the liberal division between public and private in the Indian context. right to practice one's religion and marriage practices are considered to belong in the realm of the private. But when religion sanctions untouchability and other forms of caste discrimination, its effects spill over into the public sphere. The Hindu Code Bill outlined a progressive personal laws that respected gender equality and legitimized intercaste marriage. His attempt to bring in a progressive framework for personal laws was defeated, although some of the laws that formed the bill were passed separately. The attempt to progressively codify Hindu personal law was opposed by the same forces that pushed for an immediate imposition of a uniform civil code across it. Indian feminists have taken different positions in this debate. There is a strong argument for substantive rights of gender equality within marriage and the family, while attempts to target minority communities on this pretext were opposed. The debate over the recent law banning triple talaq exemplifies the complex nature of the issue. Issues of citizenship are complicated. Citizenship is tied up with the nature of the state. The Marxist argument that the state protects the interests of the rulers is even more relevant in the era of neoliberal globalization. The power of capitalism now crosses national borders, and international agreements dictate new laws that compromise national sovereignty. The freedom of movement of capital and goods across borders contrasts with restrictions on migrants of persons. Illegal migrants are non-citizens by definition, yet they are an active part of the economy and cannot be dealt with by invisibilizing them. Feminists are familiar with the practice of invisibilization, which often involves impunity of violence against the invisibilized. Of course, the neoliberal consensus has also resulted in the withdrawal of this from the responsibility for social security and welfare. And this is an area where women have always fought for their citizenship rights. So we find that the kind of struggles over getting ration cards or BPL cards or Aadhaar cards now, and claiming the few facilities and amenities which are provided by the state in a progressively shrinking welfare regime. I think women have always been in the forefront of this, and there have been some studies done on this. I think on all the topics I have mentioned, there are colleagues in the Advanced Center for Women's Studies who have done substantial work on several of these themes. The discourse on citizenship cannot but take up the history of nation formation. Today, we are witnessing the belligerent construction of a homogenized version of the history of our nation, which is extremely exclusionary in essence. However, this version can be and uncontested. I want to draw attention here to a recent event in order to underline its significance. The gathering of thousands of Dalits at Bhima Koregaon to commemorate the 200th anniversary of the martyrdom of Dalits in the fight against the Peshwa regime was not only denounced as being anti-national, but also physically attacked. The provocateurs have not been apprehended. But what is cheering is that the debate over this incident has brought into public discourse the idea that the history of nation formation is a many-layered one that can have different meanings for different sections of society. Fighting against the rule of the Peshwas was an emancipatory struggle 19th century Dalits in Maharashtra. The assertion of the right to commemorate it is a claim to their own history, oppression, and of resistance to it. So I think even though we may be living under a regime where a certain version of nationalism is being put forward and people are being attacked, anti-national for certain symbolic acts, there is also a debate going on. And I think this debate involves Dalits, nomadic tribes, Adivasis, women, people living on our borders. And I would again say that feminism has, over the last few decades, contributed very significantly. Debates which are now becoming a part of the public discourse. And that's why I feel a certain optimism today. Finally, we have another horrifying recent event. Demonstrators carrying the national flag demanded the release of rapists of an 8-year-old girl, Ashi, in Kathua district near Jammu. Jammu and Kashmir Chief Minister Mehbooba Mufti has rightly condemned as a desecration of the national flag. The rape was supposedly carried out as a warning to nomadics who were asserting their rights. Again, here we see an unholy confluence of the citizenship of marginalized communities and an exclusionary narrative of nationalism. I think we should keep these interrelationships in mind as we follow the deliberations in this seminar, which will be talking about the citizenship rights of different groups of women. I think specific issues concerning specific sections, it's not just that we are about Dalit women, Adivasi women, OBC women, Muslim women, but I think these issues, these discussions bring up different aspects of citizenship. I think today we are more than ever aware that our democracy can only be strengthened by a free dialogue among people having different positions in society, different class, caste, positions, different languages, different cultures, coming together. And I think where Habermas talks about this kind of emancipatory communication, feminists have carried it forward to realize that we are not aiming through dialogue to reach some single consensus, but rather we understand that these debates on citizenship will always have fresh questions and allow us to take new positions and yet come together to fight for the basic principles of the rights of citizenship. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor, for your insightful and powerful choice of themes. Let me now introduce our guest of honor, Advocate Flevia Agnies. She's a women's rights lawyer, a pioneer of the women's movement. She has worked consistently on issues of gender and law reforms. As co-founder of Majlis, a legal and cultural resource center, her primary engagement has been to provide quality legal services to women. She has played an important role in bringing women's rights to the forefront while the legal system and in contextualizing issues of gender and identity. She is one of the proponents of legal pluralism within the premises of reforms from. She has played an important role in reforming the Christian personal laws and as well as advancing the rights of Muslim women. Let me now invite her to deliver her address to the gathering. Please, ma'am.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to go. Thank you, Professor Ramkumar, Vibhuti, my friend, Sujata, and others. Organize this very important consultation over 2 days. And I really wish more students will attend it because it's important and they put a lot of effort to bring this together, I think, and various speakers with various viewpoints. Professor Vandana Sonalkar's wonderful paper touches on all the aspects of gendered citizenship, which leaves very little place for me to fill in the gaps in that paper, but I will to a very limited extent do that. Actually, my paper is framing of citizenship within multiple marginalities. I don't usually have a written paper and I usually speak extempore, but this time I do have a from which I would like to speak at least some points. Actually, by gendered citizenship, what we're trying to do is to map the marginalities. The phrase mapping the margins is borrowed from an essay by an African American scholar, Kimberly Crenshaw, who wrote in 1991, about nearly 2.5 decades ago, in which he explored the issues of violence women of color in the context of their marginality. The central argument of Crenshaw's essay was that feminist and anti-racist discourses had failed to consider the intersections of racism and patriarchy. Focusing on 2 dimensions, male violence against women, battering and rape, she had explored how the experiences of women of color are frequently product of intersecting patterns of racism and sexism, and how these experiences tend not to be represented within the course of either feminism or anti-racism. Because of their intersectional identity as both women and color, within discourses that are evolved to respond to one or the other, the sex and experiences of women of color are frequently marginalized within both. She illustrated that many of the experiences which women of color were not subsumed within the traditional boundaries of race or gender discrimination, as these are understood, and that the intersection of racism and sexism factors into their lives in ways that cannot be captured whole looking at the women through dimensions of either race or of gender separately. She argued that there are various ways in which race intersect in shaping structural and political aspects of violence against women of color. Now, this is, according to me, a very important essay written in the context of the US, where women of color face kind of marginality which neither the white women nor the anti-racism movement understands, as these are seen as very isolated movements addressing very specific issues. And then the women of color fall through the crevices because their rights are not even focused in these, and their experiences are not articulated in these debates. So we need to have an intersectional framework in which these women's voices can be heard. Using this frame of marginality, we must explore the manner in which women from marginalized communities experience violence in context. I argue that though violence against women has been a recurring motive of the Indian women's movement since the 1980s, specificities of the violence suffered by women from several marginalized groups, such as Dalits, tribals, and religious minorities, need explored within the framework of intersectionality. This has seldom been done within the Indian women's movement. So there should be an attempt to do this. I think this. So I wish to focus on some specific locations of marginalities while attempting to develop the rape and sexual assault and notions of honor and stigma embedded within it, the violence suffered by women as markers of their community identities, the manner in which sexuality is controlled to maintain caste purity, a project in which upper women and lower class men also get implicated, and issues of sexual morality of lower caste and marginalized women, and of citizenship. These are some very important aspects which need to be explored. I want to go back a little about the history that even Wandana referred to. The Indian, I'll not dwell upon this, the Indian Constitution guarantees equality, Article 14. So men and women are equal, women within the same caste and community are equal. Across class they are equal. So there cannot be any discrimination based on this. But women's citizens always negotiated through family affiliations, through caste and community affiliations, and through the state. So there are different locations in women's citizenship gets to be formulated. And then we have a special provision for women and backward caste and classes of privileging their realities as they have to be less equal than others. So we have these formations in the Constitution. Now, when the Constitution was framed, exactly what was happening in the country. While this Constitution Assembly debates on Article 14 and 15 and 16 were going on, simultaneously something else parallel that was happening. At the dawn of nationhood, while ushering in the new Constitution with its guarantees of the fundamental life, liberty and freedom, the state also had to deal with the aftermath of violence unleashed during partition. The violent wrenching of a colonized country into two post-colonial nation states and redrawing of political boundaries resulted in the displacement of a huge population. While entire communities suffered in this process, women were subjected to extreme sexual violence upon them as bearers of their community identities. Apart from killing and maiming, women were also raped and abducted. As per around 75,000 to 100,000 women were raped or abducted on both sides of the border. Later, these women had to be retrieved and marked as citizens of the new nation. Now, there are several studies done by various feminist scholars, Veena Ritu Menon, Kamala Basin, Urvashi Butalia, who have this history was not in the public domain at all until feminists entered there, started looking at what happened to women then. And so now we have a lot of material that is generated. The entire debate on the recovery of the women and children at the time was a debate among men in the Indian Constitution Assembly and Parliament. It was a debate about what was happening to their honor, their women and their children, in which sentiments such as the following were expressed. So what if the mother was a Muslim and has gone to Pakistan? The father was a Hindu. So this child is our child. Gyan Pandey has recorded. When the process of retrieving the abducted women and restoring them to their home country was being carried out from 1946 to 1956, 48 to 56, around span of 8 years, there was a long drawn debate, especially among women and workers of the among social workers, among the advisability of recovering abducted and their children who had already settled down with some sense of security in their adoptive country. These women were not ready to trade off this and be uprooted yet again to face an unknown future. They did not know what terrors would await them while being into a new communities or relief camps, sometimes without their children, who would be treated by the adoptive state as their citizens. Even when the natal families could be located, these families did not accept the women, tainted women, who were by men from the enemy country. In order for the women to be accepted, those who were pregnant were forced to undergo abortions. Mothers were forcibly separated from children begotten from Muslim husbands, as these Muslim children would have no future within the new Indian state, lest that they be left behind, while the women were to be recovered and marked with the seal of citizenship. While these were concerns of women's social workers at the ground level, for the male custodians of the nation's pride, it was a question of their honor. The abducted women symbolized the shame of the nation as mother, and hence her honor the honor of the nation had to be told. Urvashi Butalia has documented this. It is within this formulation of our women and nation's honor that citizenship of a post-colonial nation state was constructed. The relation between state and women is complex and multi-layered. At one, women stake their claim for equality with men, for sameness of treatment in the public domain, for equal rights, equal opportunity, and equal protection. But at the same time, their claims were negotiated through other mediums such as tradition, culture, religion, and family, and were framed by notions of honor and stigma. This leads to the construction not just of a unidimensional citizenship in opposition to men, but a multidimensional one, and compels women to negotiate their citizenship with the state through a kaleidoscope of identities, resulting in layered, fragmented, hierarchical, and at times overclaims. Within this hierarchy, the Hindu woman becomes the ideal and most deserving object of citizenship. She is considered as a norm. As a passive citizen, she is synonymous with the nation, deserving protection and reverence. While the male occupies public space of political activity, she occupies the private space of domestic tranquility and carries upon her body the honor of a community and family. Where does this construct of the ideal gendered citizen frame religion and community identity and a domestic role leave the multitude of women who are outside the construct? Even during the national movement, there were multiple identities of women which were subsumed by the larger-than-life image of a Hindu woman, the mother figure, Mata. The struggle against foreign rule and for national freedom seemed to have been fought by men in honor and for her protection. Partha Chatterjee argues that the entire concept of tradition and women was constituted and reaffirmed in the inner domain of national culture during the national movement. The new woman was different from the British woman and from the lower caste street woman. Like the former, as she didn't seek education to attain competitive equality with men, attained feminine virtues. She was the reverse of the common street woman, who was coarse, vulgar, loud, quarrelsome, devoid of superior moral sense, sexually promiscuous, and was subjected to brutal physical oppression by males. She was an ideal companion to the Indian male, not marred by materialism, and could uphold the sanctity of the nation. The new patriarchal conferred on women this responsibility and bound them to subordination in order to legitimize the idiom of the nation. The glory of the nation became contingent to protecting the honor of the ideal Hindu woman. But this new framing of the Indian woman was far removed from the ground reality and at times blatantly incorrect. In fact, the new construction only reflected the class concerns of the elite and conveniently ignored various categories of women who were wage earners and were struggling against their working class conditions in a colonial capitalistic economy. Realities of their lives exposed the constraints and contradictions in the claim of an ideal Hindu woman and notions of emancipation within the nationalistic movement. Even when the nationalists claimed that the women's question had been resolved, women themselves interpreted struggles as not merely against colonial domination. They saw themselves as struggling on multiple fronts against social evils of their, and they fought not just national liberation, but aimed for social transformation to end their political, legal, and economic subordination. Women who struggled for their basic rights of survival, like the women in the Telangana movement who entered the public domain of political struggle to fight the oppression of a feudal order, economic oppression and of moneylenders, and sexual exploitation, but both not become the symbol of the nation. These women defied the notion of a passive citizenship. They were equal partners in the public domain. Their arms, along with the menfolk, remained unsung and unacknowledged, even by the movement, despite its pledge to equality. Male leaders related to men through the hierarchy have gender. The mechanisms of power which had held them back physically and overtly in the past had been transformed gradually into the modes of social control. The gendering of citizenship renders women as unequal citizens, not just in opposition to men within the binaries of the public and the private domains, but also within the hierarchical order of class, caste, and tea. This becomes evident when we trace the post-independence political events in the context of the lower caste Dalit women. Rape and murder of and maiming of Dalit women by upper caste men as a retaliation for essence of the community for economic or social progress still continues in the villages and towns of independent India. Lower caste women are raped as part of caste customs and village traditions and are forced to have sex with upper caste landlords and the police. Rape is often a form of retaliation to suppress movements to demand payment of minimum wages. They are not isolated incidents, but a routine occurrence. Here's of several such examples of maintaining the social hierarchy of gendered citizenship. For instance, during the period of 300 days from December 7, 2003 to June 30, 2007, about 1,200 deaths were reported in Madhya Pradesh as per the State Assembly records. Out of these, 362 were of women from scheduled caste, 310 were women scheduled tribes, and 381 were of women from the backward castes. As example of this social hierarchy of gender citizenship, which rights get constructed, is that while Constitution empowered women through reservations to local rights by enacting the 73rd and 74th Amendments to the Constitution, newspapers continue to carry reports of Dalit women sarpanches being paraded naked and humiliated for holding these positions. Rape of Dalit women continues to be a common occurrence, with around 1,172 Dalit women having been raped during the year 2005, as reflected in the statistics compiled by the Crime Record Bureau. I do not have the latest statistics, but they would reflect the same event, same trend. While most of these violence go unchecked, the gruesome killing of Dalit woman along with her 17-year-old daughter and 2 sons in Kailan village in Bandara district of Maharashtra in September 2006 made national headlines when 6 people were convicted with the death penalty, with 2 of these sentences for life imprisonment by a sessions judge in 2008. This was a major landmark with Dalit and human rights activists. Despite this, it is clear that issues concerning both gender and caste were invisibilized in the judicial. As far as caste is concerned, the accused were charged with murder under Section 302 of IPC, but were acquitted of charges under Prevention of Atrocities Act. The activists felt that this glossed over the atrocities committed upon citizens solely due to their caste positions. In August 2010, the Nagpur bench of Mumbai High Court upheld the Sessions Court ruling, which had termed the atrocities as mere acts committed out of human rage, leading to a non-application of the provisions of scheduled castes and tribes, and also reduced the death penalty. The invisibilization of gender occurred when the courts registered sexual abuse of the women, despite the fact that preliminary investigations revealed that the mother Sureka and the daughter Priyanka were abused prior to the killing. The sexual violence inflicted upon the 2 women did not receive due judicial recognition at the Sessions Court as well as the High Court level. Despite the fact that the body of Priyanka was found stripped of all clothes, the concluded that since revenge was the motive, there was no intention on the part of the accused to insult the deceased women or to dishonor or raise their modesty. While both gender and caste were invisibilized, only the crime of murder, which comes within the ambit of Section 302C, was upheld. While the Sessions Court declared that it was a rarest of rare case warranting death penalty, at the High Court level, even the rarest of rare crime was further diluted into an ordinary murder warranting only life imprisonment. As this case highlights, while the sexual brutalities committed on Dalit and tribal women are on the increase, rape and sexual abuse of lower caste and marginalized women are seldom examined within the matrix of the interface of caste and gender. The reported cases constitute only the tip of the iceberg, as a large number of cases do not even get recorded. Even these reported and charge-sheeted seldom result in conviction. The Kailan is a rare judicial occurrence. A combination of factors contribute to this dismal state of affairs. Non-accessibility of justice delivery system, marginalized communities due to factors of poverty, illiteracy, and fear of the police is one contributory factor. Institutional biased agencies against the Dalits leading to biased and careless investigation and prosecution is another. Caste and gender bias in courts of law is a further contributing factor. It is within these diverse locations of oppression that we must re-examine the anti-rape campaign of the 1980s and analyze the manner in which caste and communal biases come into play during rape, nullifying or minimizing the gains of the anti-rape campaign for women at the margins. We need to re-examine sexual violence in the context of multiple marginalities and subordinations. Now, if you see each of these cases that came, like Mathura, Maya Tyagi, Gaushiabi, the Hyderabad case. Now, each of these women from marginalized communities, and the rape happens within the context of the marginalized. But when the issue was taken up by the women's movement, taken as women, and then when it gets articulated in law, it becomes relevant to a particular section of women. The other women have fallen under through the crevices because the intersectionality of these particular locations did not get addressed either by the movement or by the courts. And so our slogan that all women are one, and in the same law will operate equally for all of us. In a way, invisibilize multiple locations of marginalities. Kimberly Crenshaw has, and other Black American feminists have articulated this concern. It is very important that we have looks of marginalities through which the judicial discourse must take place, which is not happening for us today. To give just one example, this whole Maratha struggle that's happening concerns the rape in Ahmednagar of a girl by Dalit men. And finally, 3 Dalit men were given death penalty. Simultaneously, there was a case of a Dalit man who was killed because he was having intimate relationship with an upper class woman. And in that case, all the 3 were acquitted. So you can see how the law actually works, and works for lower class men, upper class men, and all the honor killings that take place. All of them are on the question of the upper honor or honor of a particular community, including the Padmavat debate and the Rajputs. And in fact, according to me, the film is something that Muslims should have opposed, the way the Muslims are depicted in that film. But instead you have the women, of course, oppose it because the way the women are portrayed. But if you see any community that was shown as so brutal, so violent, so demonish, I was shocked that not enough voice has come to show how this political context in the realm of time that we're living, this and just a year before the general election, what sentiments it arises and is going house full because of this entire natak that happened. Is not even a great film, but I mean all the movies have contributed. In fact, Krishna Kumar has written an article just 2 days ago, I think, Indian Express. What did we do? We have not seen the. We just supported the filmmaker, including me, who doesn't see films, wanted to see as a assertion of that, something that is, at least the Rajputs are opposing, I must go and see it. And when you go and see, you wonder why the hell you've come here. What are they opposing about? It is not only pro-Rajput culture domination, it's so brutally against women, and the way the women are projected, that all these 300, 500, 600 years of struggle was not there for women at all. There's no, and then the Muslim identity and its locations. So what happens when a Dalit man approaches a higher caste woman, or when a Muslim wants to mingle with a Hindu woman? Of the entire nation, of entire Rajput honor gets violated. So within this context, we must examine our citizens, and also maybe one session on Padmavati must have while you're doing this. Thank you.
Thank you, madam. That was an interesting presentation. Now, we would like to open the session to the audience for any questions, comments that they want to make. It seems like we're all still absorbing and imagining things in our minds. So now we shall, we shall, yes. Please.
My question is in general, and perhaps it came up when I was listening to Professor Wandana Sonalkar's presentation. You said that, twice or thrice you brought in Marx and talked about how the concept of citizenship is a part of a liberal democratic framework, and you questioned, you talked about how Marx would have perhaps questioned this, or many Marxists would question how the framework of liberal democracy, whether it can really solve these problems, because it is posed in the framework of a capitalist neoliberal society. So I would like to know, you just mentioned it, what do you think? Is this framework of liberal democracy really an answer for some of the issues and questions that we are raising with reference to citizenship and women, and especially from lower caste? And
I mean, just not exactly, but can I ask a question, or should you wait to answer, Sais? No, I actually wanted both of you to sort of reflect on this question, marginality. So, especially vis-a-vis citizenship, because we are saying the notion of citizenship is actually depends on the state recognition and state action, and so it's a continuum around that, and it's constantly still. However, marginality is one expresses in the form of identity articulation, bringing out aspects of intersectional location. So that marginality is oscillated into a politics. So that transition and engagement with the state, all of this, how does one sort of, I'm just thinking aloud, how does one speak of it? Otherwise, marginality remains as diverse relations without any sort of coming together, locating it within structures. That marginality, how do you translate into structures and then into a politics? Because I think Flavia used this phrase that one understands and commission of violence vis-a-vis structures and a politics. So it's something that so that it doesn't remain just a category that is also just referred to, but how do you translate it into? So I just thought I'll raise it for discussion.
My question is about the constitutional morality, how to evolve that. Can we be complacent about security of our constitution? So many politicians currently are demanding change in constitution, and at the same time we also have a feeble movement which says they save the constitution. And in this context of identity politics, how to evolve what Baba Sahib said, that constitutional morality doesn't come automatically. You have to make endeavor. And you as a practitioner, both of you are in the women's movement. So what steps do you suggest to constitutional morality and touchstone of constitution that should determine the citizenship, not the identity politics?
my question is to you, Flavia. This is basic. My question is to you, Flavia. Basically, I would like to add a little bit more on legal pluralism, and in terms of, I understood well when you're talking about law as not really understanding different locations, and in the crevices, justice falls away. At the same time, the plurality of laws can also be very problematic and threatening in terms of how within the context of hierarchies and social discrimination and marginalities, it can be such prism can actually be used for in a way which can be much more discriminatory and much more problematic. So I would like to know, because there's the idea of legal pluralism can be enticing. At the same time, it also has within it a fundamental paradigm, which how will it coexist in our scheme of or in our globe context, will not be wished away with all these differences and hierarchies. I would like to understand that.
Marxist critique of liberal democracy, his critique of the French Revolution, which overthrows the previous feudal regime but brings in a capitalist order, okay? In which the two basic classes are the working class and the capitalists, and the state operates in the ruling class. Now that is that is an ongoing criticism of Marx, that even certain equalities, certain rights, certain contracts were established within this bourgeois democratic framework. They will always be limited because class positions are not. But when I talked a little later about the neoliberal regime, we are criticism a little bit, because now we have transnational capitalism, we have even of national sovereignty being questioned, and therefore citizenship is being questioned in a different way. So I think both these things we have to keep in mind as a framework, even when we are about all those other diversities and marginalities, as Ina was speaking about. I think, even talking about the marginalized is something that has entered our discourse maybe a couple of decades back. We no longer talk about exploited or the oppressed. We talk about those pushed to the margins of the mainstream. Maybe there is this terminology is a little inadequate. Just as no longer do we talk inequality, where there being vast differences between the rich and the poor is a systemic problem. We talk about the problem of poverty as if it was a problem only of the poor. Similarly, I think I have a reservation of the term marginality myself, and of course today I was trying to point out to the fact that various interventions by feminist scholars at various points have actually opened up a lot of questions about the liberal view of citizenship. And I think, if we piece them together, we can reach a much more nuanced understanding, which also makes parties for intervention also, opens up those as well. And of course, defense of constitutional morality today, yes, I think it should be much more vigorous. As you say, it's still a feeble movement, Bhuti, and I really don't know. Maybe the next 2 days we will come up with some idea how to defend our constitution and how to deepen our constitutional morality. I'll stop.
I always have a rider that just because I have articulate problem, that doesn't mean that I know how to solve it. So as Vandana said, feminists have opened up and allowed the space for raising more questions. Not that necessarily they have answered those questions. So I agree with the, first starting with constitutional morality and how we must bring in constitutional morality. And somehow in the 70 years, we have really failed to address. We have used the constitution in different contexts, but the idea of a constitutional morality as against other moralities, social morality, class morality, community morality, we have never really framed it, not even in the context of gender and feminism. So, and today when the constitution is under challenge, I think the need is much more that we need to have this space and reclaim this space, because on the other side, the right-wing forces have already drafted an alternate constitution, and they are and now I was just see what's happening in the country. State after state is falling into right-wing politics. and the request will soon be there for changing of the constitution. And so as citizens, what is our duty? Where is our challenge? What are we doing? I say there's a feeble movement going on, few people in Delhi, few people in Bombay meeting, but actually there's not a vigorous social movement to protect our constitutional morality and what we mean by constitutional morality, what we mean by fundamental rights, what we mean by directive principles, what we mean by federal structure and the relationship between center and state. We have not even come in, it has not gone to the masses, it's not gone to the people, and the danger is just not perceived as something immediate that's going to happen very soon after maybe next election. So this is where we are, and I agree with you that we all must mobilize ourselves into far more vigorous movements, and this could be a right place for the students to mobilize and do much more work in this area. We are very good at holding academic conferences, but not really spilled down to going down to our smaller towns or districts or villages, and what's happening there is really frightening. So that's the point I want to make about constitutional morality. The other question that was addressed by Meena about structures, how do we how does these concerns get articulated in movements or challenge the existing structures? And what are the structures that we aim to challenge? Only there's very, very isolated pockets. And that way I feel other segments, at least the Dalit segment, and as we saw in the after this attack on the Dalits at the Bhima Koregam incident, they were able to bring in a Bandh. Though of course they got flack for bringing a Bandh. At least some voice is being heard. When it comes to other issues, that we have a very fragmented movement, including a very fragmented feminist movement. Very, very fragmented, isolated box. Suddenly you do something, you say something. There's not even something that much more vigorous and with a common understanding that this is the political state we are in, this is the stage we are in at the moment. So how do we place gender within different locations? This is what is very disturbing today. And I'm glad at least I was able to come here and speak about some of these thoughts. Coming to Rishi's question of legal pluralism, I have not addressed legal pluralism in this paper. In fact, I've written a lot on legal pluralism, and particularly in the realm of family laws and how do we view legal pluralism in there. His concern, where here it is more on caste and that I was addressing. But if you can take a community and religious divide and see the personal laws and see gender located within that and see the articulation today of some way saying that, we're all women and we want rights, or we are particular community women and we want particular rights. Now, into that location, I think we need to change course and we need to have equal rights. But do we need a same law to get these rights? Or do we can communicate into the locations that we are situated and into that the rights like supposing matrimonial rights. I mean, that's much the answer that I have to give you. But just to give you the basic things that what women want is maintenance. What women shelter. What women want is custody of the children. What women want is to live a life free of violence. This can happen if you put down the rights and see their locations where they are there and where they are not there. More important, not there. So according to me, all these are there today, commonly across all personal laws. What is not there is access to justice. What we're totally lacking is access to justice. Let me complete access and awareness about our rights. And if you see what's happening around us, the kind of violence that women, when we look at the city, when we look at district, when we look at villages, somewhere, despite the 50 years we have addressed violence against women, we have not made any dent into these questions. So all the time we are digressing in other things, issues of marriage, issues of family. Each of them are very contested terrains. And unless we're able to make some negotiations into the rights of within their locations, to have a dream of a uniform law which will give all rights to all women, to me is very illusory. This is what my personal view.
like to say that one is not getting into the realm of personal uniforms. I see there's another session for that. Your presentation was also making a focus in terms of violence, which is not just in the personal realm, and that's where I was thinking about this. This question came to me pitched on the paper presentation, and I know of your writing on it in terms of personal law. So this was prompted in terms of understanding intersectionality in this domain, when one is particularly when you were talking about gang rapes, etc. So there, when one is talking about this, one needs to be conscious at some level about how the unequal and discriminatory structures can also be used in terms of making for usage of legal pluralism actually in a very troublesome way. That's what made me ask this question.
You're trying to say, particularly on the Karanji I was talking about, and how on the Karanji issue there was a murder, but there was a caste-related violence, and there was also gender issues. And if you see the judicial discourse, it ignored all and concentrated only on the murder. And with 302, it is very simple. Murder could have happened anywhere. So other issues did not get framed. I'm trying to say, when this is what happens in our judgments. If you see for a rape of tribal women, even if the groups happen within the tribal community, you say this is a tribal practice. So we sort of undermine this in the judicial discourse. You have a law that is uniform. You have also an interpretation of the law from the location of the judge, who comes from his caste positions or his upper class position, and then and also very, very urban. And then he looks at the violations that are happening over there, and the interpretation of that violence does not bring in the realities of ground realities of the people of an entire community that is violated. Okay, we can go to Gujarat. I was going to Gujarat. Now let us see Gujarat. Gujarat had so many rapes. Gujarat violence was known for its sexual brutalities upon women. And since the partition, where women's breasts were cut and or religious symbols were marked on their breasts and vaginas and all that, we have not seen violence till the Gujarat riots. I mean, that kind of extreme violence in a sustained manner over such a long period. Now, the Bilkis Banu case, you get one case actually coming out. And why didn't the other cases come out? We have done documented this and brought out a small publication called Lofty Claims and Muffled Voices. What happens to these women and their location where there is sexual violence? Their houses are burnt. Their husband may be killed. There's something else has happened. But their intimate violence that happened to them articulate when we go there, but they're not documenting this violence because of the other structures. When I say, I was not really talking about different kind of violence of different people, but the multiple locations in which this violence happens. And for instance, so many NGOs were working there, so many were going there, so many people knew that so many people were violated, women were violated, and they were young girls, they were not even women, most of them were like under 22 and sexually violated and then killed and whatever. So there might be a case for murder, killing, etc., etc. But there was no case for at all. So the rape gets invisibilized into locations where the community or the entire structure does not, the oppressors do not talk about it, the violated women do not talk about it, the men from the violated women's community do not want to talk about it, and all the concern is how will this girl get married if you bring this out, because men from the community will shun this girl. This has happened when the Bangladesh, that whole where these young girls who were violated gave birth to girls. I did not bring that in. And today what is happening to the Rohingya community? 3 countries are there, Burma, India and Bangladesh, and the violated women in those communities. I mean, some stories, isolated stories come. So occasions are very important. When we look at, we can't just say, oh, these women got raped, but they don't want to talk about it. Why they don't talk about it? We got one case here, one case there, some like sparks isolated, and so much energy goes into that getting one case somewhere, and nothing further happens there. So while rape has been an important concern, I feel I'm more and more concerned today than ever before, looking at our own work. In the 50 years, the issues that we took up very important issues, but the resolution of those issues have not come. Just to take domestic violence, just to take one issue of domestic violence, I'm just going to write about it. What happens to women? Where is the act? Where are the police community? Where is anything at all? And the brutality in the city of Mumbai, in the vicinity of our office, the kind of happens to women is unbelievable. So these locations and how I was in Goa and Ritu went and talked about patriarchy. Patriarchy is an overarching location where each of us is patriarchal. And each of us function from a patriarchal location. And all the violence happens in that patriarchal location. So even if we address all part of it, as you say, it's a broader structure. And I think within feminism, we don't have somebody like Marx who will give that overarching phrase, but not for India. That's not happened. All our writings, all our understanding has been very into a small locations. Very small. We try to write, but from, at least I write from my own perspective. I don't go out of that. But somewhere somebody has to articulate it as only for violence. You can take only domestic violence. You can take only rape. But that articulation, what is the location that we stand on? I feel that we need very desperately to do that. But I feel that I'm not the person qualified to do that. It's a philosopher, thinker, economics, I don't know who.
मैं बोलती हूँ, किसी को शायद कोई प्रॉब्लम हो तो ट्रांसलेशन कोई कर सकता है तो फ्लेविया जी, आपने जो बहुत सारी इम्पोर्टेंट बातें रखी हैं जिसमें जुडी और लॉज में सोशल रियलिटी का क्या कोरिलेशन होना चाहिए और वो नहीं है, ये बहुत ही महत्वपूर्ण बात को आगे लाना चाहिए. दूसरा जो आपने ये कहा है कि महिलाओं के सवाल जो है उसमें भी महिलाओं के सवाल जो है उसके लिए कानून की बात करते वक्त आप ये कह रहे हैं कि ये जो रियलिटीज़ है बाकी जो आपने गुजरात का भी उदाहरण दिया, तो मुझे ऐसा लगता है कि मुस्लिम महिला हो चाहे भारत की या दुनिया की कोई भी महिला, उसमें पहला सवाल पेट्रियार्की का तो आता है, ये बात तो है. हम पेट्रियार्की कैसे एनालाइज करेंगे और कम्युनलिज्म का भी पेट्रियार्की का एक हिस्सा होता है, ये बात तो है ही, तो उसको हम एनालाइज कैसे करेंगे ये एक बात आती है. लेकिन दूसरी बात ये कि एक पेट्रियार्की की वजह से जो हो रहा है उसके बारे में भी बोलना पड़ेगा. लेकिन जो कम्युनलिज्म है की बात आप कर रहे हैं, तो उसके रंगों में की शिकार होने वाली महिलाएं जो है उसके लिए एक कम्युनल वायलेंस बिल आया था जो पास नहीं हो सका है. तो हमें लगता है कि हमको ये दो तरह से देखना पड़ेगा. एक तरफ से पेट्रियार्कल सिस्टम उनके साथ रही है और दूसरी तरफ ये कम्युनल वायलेंस उनके साथ क्या कर रहा है. तो मुझे लगता है इस तरह से उसको सोचना पड़ेगा.
वही जो ऑनर का है ना, ऑनर और स्टिग्मा फॉर रेप, somewhere I feel all of us contribute to the notion that rape is the worst kind of thing that can happen to women. There is the community honor, we should not talk about it. So it's honor of the nation, honor of the community, honor of the family, everybody's honor. And thereby the silencing that happens in the cases of rape, and how that articulation, whether it's communal violence, whether it is local politics, whether it is in the family, it happens all the time. When the father has got a prerogative to rape his daughter, that is right. And this is what is coming out today in the cases of rape. So I'm not even going in communal violence so far, talking about a family and what happens within this family. And these are very disturbing questions that are coming up today, always there, but today there is an articulation of these issues that are coming up, and the state structures are not responding at all. Unless there is an intervention of an NGO, no response is coming automatically. And this is Mumbai I'm talking about. Think about the districts and taluka levels.